Arsenic for tea. The arrival of Mr. Curtis. Chapter 3. Lord Hastings kept on playing humorous jokes all week. "Daddy," groaned Daisy as she picked a splash of fake ink off her dinner plate on Tuesday, "you are an embarrassment to me." But I could tell, from the way she looked at him as he giggled into his handkerchief, that she didn't mean it. Although the careful, good show Daisy was still in place whenever her mother was watching, I noticed that her secret side, clever and fiercely interested in everything, kept popping out around Lord Hastings, and that, I knew, meant something. Daisy only shows her real self to people she truly likes, and there are not many of them at all. At dinner that day, though, Lady Hastings was there, and so Daisy was careful to be absolutely proper. "Really, George," snapped Lady Hastings, glaring at her husband. We all cringed a bit. There was something very wrong between Lord and Lady Hastings this holds. At Christmas I had thought Daisy's mother perfectly nice, if slightly vague, but this time she was quite different, all brittle and angry at everything. She was still just as tall and blonde and glamorously beautiful as she had been at Christmas, but now her beauty was like a porcelain vase that must not be touched. Everything Lord Hastings did seemed to be wrong. Staying in the house with them was a bit like being stuck in the middle of a war, with troops on either side sending shells over our heads. I knew all about parents not speaking. At home there are weeks when my mother and father talk to each other through me as though I'm a living telephone. But this seemed to be something else entirely. Poor Lord Hastings drooped. Hopeful presents of sagging flowers and squashed chocolates kept appearing outside Lady Hastings' room, and then were banished straight down to the kitchens, which began to look very much like the inside of a hothouse. Daisy and I ate most of the chocolates for our bun breaks. Daisy insisted on having bun breaks in the holes in honour of Deep Dean, and I saw no reason to argue with her. "He loves her," said Daisy, munching an orange cream, "and she loves him too, really, only sometimes she doesn't show it. She'll come round in the end." I wasn't so sure. Lady Hastings seemed to spend all her time either locked away in her bedroom or on the telephone in the hall, whispering away into it and falling silent when we came too close. It was not just Daisy and I who had been turned into hostages of the row between her parents. Daisy's brother Bertie, who was in his final year at Eton, was home for the holidays too. Bertie looked unnervingly like Daisy, a daisy stretched out like India rubber and shorn of her hair. But if Daisy fizzed like a rocket, Bertie hummed with rage. He was cross all the time, and as soon as he arrived he began to crash about the house. He had a pair of bright green trousers, an out-of-tune ukulele, which he insisted on playing at odd hours of the day and night. According to Daisy, he could only play 3 songs, and they were all rude, and a friend whose name was Stephen Bampton. I felt very grateful that Stephen was not a cross person. He was short and stocky, with smooth reddish hair, and he seemed gentle and slightly sad. He looked at me as though I were a person rather than the Orient, and I liked him at once. I was glad he was there, because this hole's Fallingford felt foreign, or perhaps it reminded me how foreign I was. Bertie jangled away on his ukulele, musically angry, and Lord and Lady Hastings argued, and Daisy went bouncing around the house, showing me secret hiding places and house martin nests and a sword that had belonged to her great-grandfather, and I began to be hungry for my own Hong Kong house's gluey heat and fake flower arrangements. The last person in the house, apart from the cook and housekeeper Miss Docherty, and Hetty the maid, was Miss Alston, Daisy's governess. There was always a governess in the holidays at Fallingford to help Daisy with prep and keep her out of trouble, and to help Lord Hastings write letters. "He gets muddled when he tries to do it himself, poor dear," Daisy told me by way of explanation. This Holes, though, dull, droning Miss Rose, who we'd had to suffer at Christmas, had quite inexplicably gone away. "With only the briefest telephone call," said Lady Hastings, as cross as ever. "Really?" Instead, we had Miss Alston. Miss Alston was, as our Deep Dean dorm mate Kitty would have said, a frump. She was the very image of a spinster blue stocking. She wore ugly square clothes without a waist. Her hair stood out from her forehead in a heavy clump, and she always carried an enormous handbag in ugly brown pigskin. On first acquaintance, she seemed very safe and very dull, but that was misleading. The more lessons we had with her, the more we realised that Miss Alston was not dull at all. She was interesting. Miss Rose had simply marched us through our Deep Dean prep like an army general with no time to waste. But Miss Alston was not like that at all. If we were working on a Latin translation about Hannibal, she would stop to talk about his elephants. If we were learning about water, she took us outside to look at the clouds. If we were reading a Shakespeare play, she asked us whether we felt sorry for the Macbeths. I said yes, though they shouldn't have done it. And Daisy said, absolutely not, of course. Explain, said Miss Alston, and for almost half an hour we both quite forgot that we were doing prep in the holidays with a governess. The oddest thing was that around the grown-ups, Miss Alston was very different. She was perfectly ordinary. When she wasn't busy with us, she sat with Lord Hastings, drafting his letters and making lists and ordering him yo-yos and fake moustaches from his boy's own catalogues. He thought Miss Alston deadly dull, just as Daisy and I had before she began teaching us. She doesn't even laugh at my jokes, he complained. I shouldn't think that was a surprise, said Daisy, patting him on the head as if she were stroking Toast Dog. Mummy, where did you find Miss Alston? Goodness, how should I remember? Asked Lord Hastings, who was busy trying to brush dog hair off her cape. The agency, I suppose. There was a letter. Heavens, Daisy, why must you complain about your governesses? You know perfectly well that I can't look after you. Quite obviously, said Daisy icily. I knew what lay behind the question. Daisy wanted to understand Miss Alston and what made her so different, but there was no easy answer to that. Miss Alston kept on being privately interesting and publicly dull, and Daisy and I became more and more curious about her. Chapter 4. Lady Hastings, when she was not mysteriously on the telephone, spent all her time organising Daisy's birthday party, although it was quite obvious that the party was really going to be Lady Hastings, not Daisy's. A children's tea, said Daisy scornfully. How old does she think I am? At least Daisy had been allowed to invite guests. Kitty and Beanie from our dorm at Deep Dean were coming for the weekend, which made me glad. Being at Fallingford was making me think almost longingly of Deep Dean's scratchy blankets and smell of washed clothes and boiled food. On Friday morning we were in the dining room, and I was halfway through a piece of toast, plum jam from Fallingford's walled garden, butter from its herd of cows, when we heard the growl and crunch of a car on the drive outside. Daisy stood up, leaving her kipper half-eaten. "Kitty," she said, "Beanie!" She shoved back her chair and went rocketing out into the hall. I followed her, still chewing and licking jam off my sticky fingers, turned left through the dining room door and went thumping straight into her back. I yelped and grabbed at her cardigan to stop myself falling over. "Daisy," I said, "whatever?" Daisy had frozen, just like Millie with a rabbit in her sights. "Hello," she said. "Who are you?" I craned round her to see who she was speaking to. There, standing in the arch of a stone doorway, was a man. He was quite young for a grown-up, with wide shoulders and a narrow waist, just like a man in an advertisement. He came into the hall, slouching fashionably, and I saw that his face was good-looking, his dark hair very smooth, and his smile toothpaste wide. He did not look at all at the sort of man who might belong in the front hall of Fallingford House. The man shone his teeth at Daisy. "You must be Daisy," he said, "the little birthday girl." "Yes," said Daisy, coming forward to shake his hand with her prettiest smile, though I could tell that she was burning up with fury at being called little, and burning with curiosity to know who this man was, and how he knew her when she had never met him. Daisy, you see, hates to be at a disadvantage with anyone. Then the dining room door banged open again, and Daisy's mother appeared behind us. "Mummy," said Daisy lightly, "who is this?" "Good heavens!" cried Lady Hastings. Her voice had gone very shrill, and her cheeks were pink. "How lovely. I wasn't expecting you until later, Dennis. Daisy, dear, this is my friend, Dennis Curtis. He's here for your party. Be nice to him." "I always am," said Daisy, beaming up at Mr. Curtis. I knew that inside she was absolutely seething. "Your mummy and I are very good friends," said Mr. Curtis, who seemed to be under the impression that we were 7. "Daisy is tremendously clever," said Lady Hastings, batting at Mr. Curtis's arm with her fingers. "He's in antiques, you know. He knows all about beautiful things. He's going to look at some of the things at Fallingford this weekend. But Daisy, I want this all to be a lovely surprise for your father. You mustn't tell him." Despite herself, Daisy's eyes narrowed. "Really?" she asked. "Yes." Lady Hastings' voice was shriller than ever. "You know how sentimental he can be, but just think how exciting if some of those horrid old paintings turn out to be worth something after all. I can get rid of them and buy lovely new ones instead." This worried me, but what worried me even more was the way Mr. Curtis was smiling at Daisy's mother, and the way he kept his hand on her arm for far longer than was necessary. It was the sort of nasty grown-up thing that I do not understand, but wish I didn't.